Hello, everyone. This is Deb with the UAP Medical Coalition. Today I have Baptiste, and he's going to introduce himself. Can you please let everyone know who you are?
Sure, my name is Baptiste Friscourt. I'm the French correspondent for Debrief. I cover UAP topics here in France, and I'm also editor-in-chief of UAP Check, a web platform designed to publish reliable content about UAPs.
Okay, so I invited Baptiste today to talk about some of the differences between the United States and France regarding UAPs because we need to consider the cultural implications of varying views. So, could you please, first of all, tell people how France has been responding to the UAP issue overall?
So we are quite advanced in a way in France because since 1977 we have a proper UFO public group that is joined to the National Space Studies Center. So since a long time ago, we've been studying UAPs, as it is called today, and their effects on the witness.
You said that you also have been talking about the effects on the witness.
Mhm.
So I know that if people have read up on the topic, Valet has gone over some cases that were in France. But how often do you feel, or you can just kind of ballpark, how many cases would you say have to do with someone who is witnessing the UAP having some kind of medical issue or a psychological issue, then that's something that gets discussed.
So we don't have numbers per se, but inside the academic research track that is studying that kind of experience, it's called anomalous or extraordinary experience. It amounts to 6% of the cases that has been reported that are related to UAPs, and in 3% of the cases, it's related to abductions.
Wow, actually, that's a lot more than I expected. Do you have support in France for those people who are having those experiences?
Yes, it's state supported. Uh, what happens in France, depending of the personality of the witness, he either contacts nobody and talks to no one about it. So it's always a lack of data about that. Or he talks to the GEPAN, that is the French UFO public group, and then the Japan talks back to the CRC of or Intopsy to take charge of the witness if he detects that the witness has been psychologically injured. And among these cases, we consider that for the entire population, about a third of the population, between a third and a half of the population, we have what we call an anomalous experience.
Wow. Okay, that's quite significant. Um, how are those people respond to? What would you say some of the differences are in how French society is responding to those experiencers as opposed to how the United States has responded?
We don't talk about it in this society per se, but there is a huge interest in the public. You have several shows that are dedicated to it. You have special shows, news shows about anomalous experience that have been publicized. But it's not a subject we talk openly to newcomers. You need to have a relation to the people you are talking to open about it.
Okay, so there's sort of a closed mouth approach publicly. So it's not something that would be brought up over dinner necessarily.
Over dinner, yes, because dinner is a ritual for the Frenchman, but it's not something we talk around a coffee, for example.
Oh, okay. Um, so it seems like with having Gapon is, I think that's how you pronounced it. I always think of it as Gpon for some reason.
It's Japan.
Yeah,
Uh,
Japon. Okay, so with having that organization, there's a very serious approach, and I know that's associated a little bit with the government, the military. So it's a very serious approach in France to this topic. Is that correct?
yes, yes, it's a serious approach. The witnesses are not joked around. They are taking care of either on a medical point of view or psychological point of view.
Right. So does that mean that psychiatrists and scientists are involved?
Yeah, sure. Since the year 2000, there was a whole field of research that has been developed in Europe regarding anomalous experience, and they've been quite far in the study. And what is interesting is that they don't judge the reality of the witness report. They only judge they only think about what the witness is reporting and if it can be caused by a psychological uh, defect before the actual witness event, or if it's caused by something that has been witnessed. And that's the main argument they are using for their research.
And do you have any research results on how many of those witnesses might have had psychological issues?
I don't think so.
Great. Do the majority appear to be completely stable and credible?
Mm, well, we have one statistic that can be an answer to your question, is that among the people that have been reporting UAPs, 50% of them consider the event as pleasing or seek to reproduce the event, and 50% have a form of psychological or somatic suffering.
Okay. So that's unfortunate that we don't actually necessarily know if there were psychological issues beforehand, but I think that is one of the
Oh,
things. Yeah.
that's
Uh,
part of the study. It's not part of the public data because it's confidential due to the patients. But it's part of the study. You have 6 scenario types that are being developed that can explain each type of witness reports that can arise.
Right. So I think, there's also this mistake that people make that they think someone who sees a UAP, if they had an issue beforehand, they're considered not credible. And I think that's a mistake. In fact, I think sometimes it might make them more aware and more credible about something that they experienced.
No,
Um,
it's something we've noticed. If there is among the population that is witnessing UAPs, or anomalous events for that matter, you have a recurring phenomena where the same people have a series of events they witness.
right. So I'm going to ask about, because most of the people watching this are not going to know this. What is the healthcare system like in France? For someone, for instance, if they have a mental health issue or if they have a medical issue, um, what is the healthcare like?
So, by baseline, you have a doctor, a medical doctor that is you're designed, you're pointed out to that doctor, and you can choose which doctor you want to have as your doctor. And then each time you need to have a specific type of care that you require, you go to that doctor. He verifies that yes, you actually need that type of help, and then you can go for free to another doctor that will take charge of you. You also have type of short circuit when in some insurances or complementary insurances, because we have a welfare state in France, you can directly go to a psychiatrist or psychologist for a few hours for free.
Wow, so free healthcare. I love it. We dream about that. So is it fairly easy and timely for someone to get care?
Specifically when they are very specific in their need. So in case of UAP, it's a very small amount of the population that is requiring help. So we already have the channels ongoing. What we are lacking are coverage. So we have part of the territory that are poorly covered by specialists. So you may have to travel to see a proper specialist.
Okay. So you said that there's always already sort of a network for anomalous experiences. So there's people who have training already to handle people who have experienced the anomalous. Is that correct?
So training in part, if they are aware of that type of research. For an example, you had a poll that was being made around psychiatrists and psychologists, and four of five of them declared that they were insufficiently prepared to deal with anomalous cases. So it's a beginning field of research. 20 years is nothing for science.
Mm-hmm.
So many psychologists or psychiatrists aren't trained specifically for anomalous experience treatments, but you can find experts in France or in Europe. You have the oldest modern research group that is in activity in Germany. Across Europe, you can find specialists for that type of care.
I'd love to talk to Germany about this as well, of course. But it's fascinating. So they're doing a lot of the research to inform what training and what care that they would do. Is that
Mm.
correct? Right. Okay.
Yes, when they are aware it exists.
Okay. And when you say when they're aware, do you think that there's still an issue of some patients not wanting to talk about that with their doctor?
Oh yes, yes, of course. We still have a social stigma that is very strong about it, and especially in the case of UAPs, because there is the crazy flag to it. So somebody can really be fearful of being prevented to be free and to be restrained in a psychiatry institution due to his witness reporting. That being right or wrong, it's the perceived nature of the problem for the witness.
Okay, so if someone doesn't get put in the network for care specifically for something anomalous, they might find themselves with a doctor who might put them in a psychiatric institute.
Uh, it shouldn't be possible. I can't talk in absolute, of course, because you have very strict rules to what you can do. You can do that when the patient is a threat to himself or to others, and it's very policed as a way of dealing with patients, but it's the perceived nature of the power of the psychiatrist by the population.
Okay, so it's not a reality, but a concern that people have that keeps them quiet.
Yes, and you have the blowback is that you can have a very experienced psychiatrists that encounter an anomalous experience patient for the first time, and it both blow back in the patient and the psychiatrist because he's not trained to deal with that type of information, and he can both make them more unstable if they are not prepared.
Okay, so that training program that they're working on, the research and training is super essential in France as well. Have you any awareness of some of the practices that might have had really good outcomes for patients?
Hmm? It's it's quite advanced when you dig into it, but it's quite simple in the concepts. Is open-minded talk with the patient. So let him talk about what he felt, what he saw, what he perceived, and just by doing that, you can explain away most of the cases that are conventional but have been interpreted as anomalous by the patient. So that's a huge part of the work is that you need the patient to trust you. So you can't judge. There is something that is called the suspension of judgment There is a better word for it, but it's a translation, where you require the psychiatrist to not make a judgment about the reality of what encountered the witness and just listen to it and give very basic advice to explain away the cases if it's explainable by a conventional mean. And then you have a cognitive approach where you try to make the patient digest the information and create a framework that makes the information logical inside a conventional framework. So that's a way of dealing with trauma in many ways, is just to have the patient tolerate what he witnessed.
Okay, yeah, tolerating is a good word for it. A lot of people talk about the need to adapt to the situation, to be able to put it inside their life so
Mhm.
that it doesn't disrupt their life. Um, one of the curiosities that I have is, do you see any differences in the types of cases that involve, like, say, entities in France that you might see in another country?
That's a good question. I don't think there were social studies about that. That's a
Because
good
for
question.
so for instance, in Brazil, there's lots of aggression happening with entities. And there's also reported entities that have like supposed like a scaly skin, you know, but the
Mhm.
United States has a lot of these reports of the gray entity. So I was just wondering if there's a difference in France in either their interactions with UAPs or with entities. Are there any differences?
Oh, it's a very good question. I would like to know the answer. What I know is that there is a cultural effect that takes place in some cases where the cause of the event isn't anomalous in nature. It's an expression of something that has been refrained by the witness, or a past trauma trying to heal itself or exists by itself. And at that point, you have cultural biases that enters the field and gives a narrative to the witness. So that's something you hear quite a lot. For sorry for the mistakes in English. It's that each witness will have a story to tell because it's a rare event and it's something of importance to him. So when you have cultural biases that are causing a bias perception of the event by the witness, then you can have signature of the culture of a witness that will see the events as explained by a part of its culture. For example, we know that in Africa there is very little reports of UFOs and abductions because they have an animalistic culture where everything can be spiritual in itself. And when they see close encounters, they declare to see ghosts. They don't see extraterrestrial beings, for example.
Yes, I actually have been reading some folklore from Africa and from various countries in Africa, and some of them include something like the rainbow serpent, which was also in Australia and North America. And the description is basically a large serpent that flies and has multiple colors. And I think that we do have to remember framework when we address these things culturally. Um,
Mhm.
so, so what do you think about the culture in France we should be aware of if we're talking to someone about UAPs in France?
Oh, it's pretty much the same as the United States. Since World War II, I don't think we can say that there is a French cultural frame of reference that is that different to other Occidental countries like the UK or Germany or the US. I think that's pretty much the same soil of culture. You need to go back in time a century ago to really have a separation between the United States culture and French, and that will be inside folklore. So when you look at old monks' reports from the 14th century, or if you look at astronomers in Paris in the 18th century, then you can look for specific cultural signature. But I don't think that it's that different in France from in the US. But again, I don't think there has been any social studies comparing anomalous experience depending of countries.
Well, I think they should, definitely. I think it'd be a fascinating
Great
book.
question.
Yeah, it would be a great book, especially when they realize how many countries there are in Africa. It's like the
Mhm.
fact that people just say Africa, but it's like tons of countries, and there's a vast variation. Some people also forget that Egypt is in Africa, and there's some indication that some of the things reported by the Egyptians may have been entities rather than gods. So,
Oh,
you
there have
said,
been scrolls that have been discovered in Egypt, ceremonial scrolls that are prayers to make the ghost go away and not take you in the night. So that's quite an interesting point.
yeah, that's interesting also is that Rainbow Serpent was accused of stealing children.
Mhm.
And when you look at other historical cases, when people talk about fairies and fae, the little people, they are also accused of stealing children.
Mhm.
So I am curious about, you said when you look back far enough in French history and look at some of the old folklore, there is some cultural signature. I wonder if you have some examples, just like I said with like the fairies and the fae,
Mhm.
um, which is I guess more of a like Irish, right? But it's so. What would you say are some examples of cultural signature?
So you have different roots of culture in France. So in the western part, that would be very true. We had a Celtic culture that was present in the northern part and western part of France. And the further you go south, you fell into more Roman type of culture. So even inside the French folklore, you need to difference between the various folklores. But the most obvious would be the Celtic roots and all Germans. France is called France because we've been invaded by a German people that was called the Franks. So they gave their names to the country. So we have also a large part of our folklore that comes from German roots. And for example, we had stories of ogres in the mountains and the forests, the deep forests that could eat people. We had a lot of fairies, a lot of little people that were going around. Very a type of mix between the Roman southern part of France culture, southern part of Europe culture, sorry, and northern part of Celtic culture.
What about gargoyles? Gargoyle.
So gargoyles were it's a bit a counter use. So we use gargoyles on cathedrals, for example, to make demons go away. So they are a protective sign for people. It's a very, very old root dating back to Sumerian temples.
Right, and it's interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
We're basically using this strange entity to scare off other entities.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I always wonder what all of those things might mean. The trolls, for instance, they're very similar to stories of ogres and very similar to stories of giants, which is very similar to the Bible stories of Nephilim. And it makes you wonder, like, although I don't think we have any fossil records that are true evidence of giants, but it makes you wonder what people were seeing, that they were talking about these tall beings that were aggressive and would take people and fight people. Um, it's curious. I would love for people to try to look at the roots of some of these things.
I'm not sure we need to go anomalous for that because we had also. And it's true also in some parts of Africa, a culture of hermits or recluse people. It was people that were living alone in the forest because you had no mental care at the time. So people that were insane were deemed irresponsible of their acts and banished into forests. So that can explain a lot of folklore too.
Right. So I'm curious. I'm going to pull this back a little bit to the mental health for a moment, because the word insane just brought me back there. Um, how is France responding generally to people who have mental health issues? Is there a stigma, or are they open about it and trying to support people with mental health issues?
Oh no, we have huge support from the state for that.
Okay, great. Because I know in the United States, there's still a lot of stigma. People are afraid that they will lose a job if they go get help. In fact, another aspect that has been concerning in our research is that a lot of people, like pilots, used to be afraid that they would be taken out
Mhm.
of rotation, so to speak, if they went to
Absolutely.
get mental health help. Is that the same in France?
So what they noticed is that it was more dangerous to not give them help. So you have psychological evaluation that are happening in jobs where you have the life of others in your hand. So that was a huge step forward. But the fear is still there. Is that when you report a sighting, it's not that much mental than hallucinatory effects due to eye defect, for example. So that can remove a pilot from flight service. That's the type of problem you could encounter.
Yeah, sorry, a motorcycle just went by and I was like, "Oh, it sounds like a plane." What interesting timing. Um, so yeah, that's not really I guess I understand that they would not want someone flying who's having mental health issues. I guess my bigger concern is once they get treatment, are they able to go back to flying?
That's a good question. I do not know.
Okay, so that's something the world just needs to continue to work on. I would think that there would be some pressures about being a pilot that anyone might consider getting some mental health treatment for. So it's just something we all need to work on still. Um, so it sounds like, just to summarize, you have very serious reporting happening. It is publicly known, and there are shows about it.
Mhm.
The government is involved with JPON, and there are serious researchers. Scientists are welcome in, psychiatrists are welcome. There's a little bit of stigma when it comes to getting mental health care because people are concerned that they might still be hospitalized, which happens here as well. But in reality, there are resources for those people, including CERSI. And that is kind of a summary, correct?
Yes, it is that we are all countries. So we started looking into anomalous experience as a track of scientific research dating back in the 19th century. So we have a long history of observing what is happening.
Okay, I'm glad that you guys have been pretty open about that for such a long time. I know, of course, French pilots saw the Foo Fighters as well. That Foo Fighter wave, so to speak, impacted many countries. Are there any other major cases that you think would have impacted France in a way to like really influence them on this topic?
So if you look at ArcSci, that is a repository for scientific studies, you can find a study made by Michael Vaillant called Spatial Point Pattern Analysis of UAP. And it will give you a map of France with the density of UAP compensated with the population. And it shows you the areas of interest. And we have been quite visited. For example, if you go back to 1952, 1954 in the newspapers, you have articles describing saucers landing, people getting out of it, and being shut down by farmers thinking it was Germans trying to evade them again. So we had a long history, and it's quite carved inside our story. But the stigma has been very strong in France too. So it's only in recent years that in like the last 10 years maybe, that the media really started to talk about it openly.
Okay. Well, I'll take that decade. That's still longer than us, right? So, I'll take it. I noticed also that, there were a lot of records from France left online for people, and it's
Mhm.
pretty open for people to go and look at them. How long has that been available to people and open to the public?
Oh, it's quite recent. It's when the Japan numerized its archived, that digitalized, I think in English, it's archived, and I think it's still the record of connections to an official government site in France.
Right. It is. I've seen it. It's still out there. So I appreciate that. I noticed also that there was a wave of countries doing that, and I want to say about 2010. They we had Spain put out stuff.
Mhm.
The UK put some stuff out. Brazil puts things out. Just a wave. Why do you think it was that so many countries said at the same time, "Let's put this information out for people"?
Oh, it's mostly logistical ease of use. So when you have people that are like you have 10,000 people that are all requesting a specific document relating to UAPs, it's really cumbersome. It's an easier way to just digitalize everything you have, take it to a sensor group to remove any personal information or classify technology, and then publish it on the internet. So you don't overload your very few people that are able to interface with the public with what is considered irrelevant questions.
Okay. Um, so that makes sense. Just to simplify things, yes.
Mm.
I noticed that someone on Twitter now called X that recently they said in Germany they just do an announcement if a UAP goes by. They just announce it on the radio. Oh, there was a UAP. Is there anything like that in France yet?
Every time you have a sighting of node that is happening in France, it's reported by the news. For example, we had a very well-known hoaxer that tried to create, I don't know, some kind of news event by organizing fake sighting with fake witness reports talking to the press. And the press reported it as very plainly, some people say there is something, and he was thinking to make a big deal out of it, showing how unreliable information the media was, but it fell very flat. So when there is, it was quite painful to watch, to be honest. So when there is a sighting that is very noticeable, it's spread by the media with no problem. What is a bit harder is to find an event that has sufficient information so the media can pick it up. For example, when you check across the Japan database, you have around one case per month that is very reliable and very anomalous. So, and it's quite frequent compared to other countries.
Okay. Yeah, I've noticed they said, for instance, that our controllers in the United States get about 3 a month. So, 1 to 3 a month sounds like pretty frequently to me, and that was just from the controllers, not the civilians. And of course, I'm sure there are people in France just like here that don't even report. And some
Oh yes.
people I know people who see these objects regularly who don't bother to report.
Hmm.
It just
Absolutely.
becomes common to them. They just live with it. So,
Oh, there was a study that was made, it was ages ago, but it's still relevant. If you make the hypothesis of a gigantic craft showing up in full daylight for over an hour above a city, only 30% of the actual witness say they saw something. So even in very major cases, we can talk about the Belgium wave, for example, where we have thousands of reports on a month. You only have a very small part of the population that openly talks about it.
yeah, I think for the Phoenix Lights, there were probably over 1,000 people who saw it. and 700 or something called a politician, but I think there were less that would have done an official report with MUFON, for instance, considerably less. And actually, I think finding footage of the actual Phoenix lights as opposed to the flares that the Air Force put out right after is difficult. I think most of the time people show the flares and not the actual sighting. So I understand there's difficulty in getting people to report. I'm sure that will impact the data. So hopefully, we'll inspire some more people to report by talking about it and
Absolutely.
normalizing it. Yeah. So I want to go back to what you said about the media. You said that it was very flat and they didn't have a lot of information in some cases, but I'm curious about how they treat the topic when they are presenting it. Because in the United States, we still deal with them playing the X Files and laughing when they
Mhm.
report often. Sometimes they're more serious, but how are they reporting it? Like, how are they presenting it in France?
So it really depends on where you are going to talk about it, on which platform. So when you are on a very popular, light-hearted platform, you will have some jokes about it. You will have the X-Files music. But when you start to go on a newscast and a news show prime time, we see less and less jokes and X-Files music about it in the last few years. What happened in the US has tainted what happens in France in a good way.
Okay. So that leads me to a question of, do you feel like other countries are doing a good job of working with you on this research? I just thought of lots of countries in South America, like Peru and Mexico, are really taking this really seriously. And they're having another hearing in Mexico soon.
Mhm.
And so many of those countries involve their military and their government too. I think Chile is another example where they do that. Do you have any people from those other countries working with you and trying to cooperate with the research?
So it's the same thing that happens with every scientific study. So you have Japan that organize a conference, worldwide conference, with experts from all over the earth that came to show what were working on regarding UAP studies and showing the different points of view on how to deal with them and which type of data regarding device or analysis of witness reports were the most accurate, for example. So it's something you see in every types of field of research. So you need to go to conference to know what is happening everywhere and what is the accurate research and the actual research that is being made.
In France, what do you think they're most interested in regarding the research? Because it really varies, I think, quite a bit. Like some people are very interested in the technology because they want to use it, expose it, whatever. Some people are very interested in the implications about entities and what that might mean. What do you think? Like, is it everything, or is there something specifically the French are looking at that they're most interested in?
If there was a technological study of UAPs, we wouldn't know about it because it would be classified, and classification in France is much more severe than in the US, so we wouldn't know about it. What we know about is the actual care that is being given to the witness, and that is quite extensive. I mean, we are talking 10 to 15 talks with a well-educated psychiatrist on UAP. So it's quite an extensive treatment that is given to the witness that have been traumatized by what they saw.
Besides trauma, can you just speak briefly about what other things you're seeing amongst witnesses in France? Are they having the same things like radiation burns like we see here?
I've been looking for it. It's evocated in the studies I could read, but I didn't pinpoint a specific case of burns in France. But I'm not an expert. Probably somebody in the comments will pinpoint you to specific cases.
Yes, I know that also abductions have not been as steadily reported in the past, but one of the first abductions I think that Valet talked about was in France. Would you say that the abductions happened about the same time as the other countries, about starting in the 50s?
Yes, these stories are very similar to what happened in the US. Very similar. We had cases that are almost um, mirror like what happened in the US,
Yes, and
including on abductions, implants, etc.
yeah, same thing in South America. RD6 Killer Clark went there and interviewed people. It sounds exactly the same there too. It's very interesting that there's so many commonalities.
Mhm.
Um, so my last question, I think, about the differences between France and the United States would be we have, this kind of excitement among politicians related to the UAP topic. Some of, it entered the debates recently. So, what do you think is the political connection in France to the UAP topic?
So back in the 1980s, the government was aware of it. There was almost an open talk about it. The problem is that it's like a game of poker. As long as the other nations don't know what cards you have in your hand, you are in favorable position. So that's the problem we have in France. Is that if they know nothing, they won't say it. If they know something, they won't say it. And the problem is that the stigma is still strong. So there is no benefit for politicians to talk openly about UAPs. That's probably the main difference with the United States, because almost all of your presidential candidates talked about UFOs during the campaign to gain votes of people that are interested by it. That's something you would almost never see. You maybe have one politician that talked about it openly for a campaign, and you have a former president, François Hollande, that talked about it answering a question from a children, but he had no information to give him. And back in the day, you had the Ministry of Defense that talk about it, and that's pretty much the extent of what we have.
And I think about in terms of eradicating stigma, it needs to be leaders that talk about it too and are open about it. So it's unfortunate that they're not comfortable doing that because they want to protect the information. Um,
Or very strong material evidence. So when I talked about my with my contacts about that, they all told me, okay, the only thing that we really require is material evidence. And once we will have publicly available material evidence, that's what Jacques Vallée and Nolan are working on right now, uh, showing without a shadow of proof that there is artificially made UAPs relevant of technology that isn't from human origin. That will open a lot of doors.
so what you're saying is there needs to have a UAP crash in France, and then the whole world will know about it.
We just need a paper published in a peer-reviewed study that shows that the compounds from a debris field that has been recovered, and Valley has something like 25 different samples, come from technology of non-human origin, and that sample to be confirmed by other scientific studies in other teams. And that will be the breakthrough many people are waiting for.
Okay, I do think that there is how do I put this, a race, but it's a careful one about
Absolutely.
who's going to say it first. And I have to point out that China also has
Mhm.
international conferences about UFOs. And I wonder because they want to be an example so often if it's not going to be them.
ICER, an organization that is trying to have San Marino to organize under the authority of the United Nations, a UFO conference 1 day each year was created by China in its first plan and with the help of Russia. So there is a large amount of interest from authoritative powers, because the first one to break through this technology will have a century of advance. So there is a very large amount of geopolitical interest about the technology related to UAPs.
Yes, and I'm glad you also mentioned that China is working with Russia because I've uncovered that for some time they were working and studying UFOs together, including
Mm-hmm.
crashed ones.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Um, yeah, they had several that they reported, and the United States was aware of it at the time because we actually were asked to help them at the time because we were friendlier with them when they asked for our help. They asked Carl Sagan to go create a Russian UFO study.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he did it, but he was asked to do it. Um, so I want to thank you very much for coming and talking to me about this important recognition of France because I think we often forget that there's lots of other countries involved in this topic. It's a global topic. And sometimes those other countries are going to handle things differently and have different societal issues. I also truly appreciate that France is looking to help experiencers and doing some serious research and serious studies and bringing serious people on board. I hope that that will make people in other countries more comfortable about coming forward and helping to see that example that your country is leading with. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. And for people that are looking for the information, all scientific studies made in France regarding that topic are available in English. So just look for the publication by the CRC and Intopsy, Mr. Raberon, Evra. Uh, it's readily available, and it's very in-depth, interesting studies.
Okay. And can you please let people know where they can find you if they have questions?
Sure. So the easier way is to ring me at on X, formerly known as Twitter, Baptiste_free FRI, and I'm open to any GM, so feel welcome to do so.
Okay. And thank you again. And to everyone who is listening, thank you for listening and take care.
Goodbye.